Good morning. I want to welcome you all to day one of our 6th Virtual Training Institute. So as we have participants coming into this session, we want to ask that you put in the chat your name and where you're coming from. And please make sure that you change it to all participants. Otherwise, it will just come to the panelists. So thank you to those who are introducing yourselves. We appreciate that. So if you're having any technical difficulty as we go through, you can go ahead and send a message just to panelists, and we'll see what we can do to assist you with that. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, just want to welcome you all to our 6th Virtual Training Institute. And we're going to go ahead and launch a poll real quick, just so that Rishan knows who is with us this morning. So if you would take a moment to go ahead and complete the poll, that would be very helpful. Okay, so it looks like I think almost everybody has completed the poll. So I'll just quickly share the results. And so most of our participants are instructors, a few others, and then instructional specialists, and a few program administrators with us. So today we have Rishan Habte, and she is going to be giving a presentation on applying adult learning. Thank you. Principles to connect with refugee students. And I am going to turn it over to her at this time. So thank you again, Rishan, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Ramona. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rishan Habte, as Ramona said. I am the Program Officer for Economic Empowerment at LIRS Switchboard. LIRS is Lutheran Immigrant and Refugee Services. We are headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland, and we are one of the 9 resettlement agencies in the United States that resettles new arrivals. I'll get into that a little bit later, what that means exactly. So I'll get started. So the first thing I want to do is go over some of our objectives. So by the end of this presentation, participants will be able to increase their understanding of refugees in the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, apply adult learning principles when working with culturally diverse groups, and incorporate instructional strategies into lesson plans. You can ask questions throughout the presentation. Go ahead and put them in the chat. Since it's a fairly small group, you can also raise your hand and turn your microphone on and ask me a question if you'd like as well. Okay, so the first part, defining a refugee, an asylee, an SIV, and a humanitarian parolee. So I am going to start with a little poll, and I want you to put either 1, 2, or 3 in the chat. So the first question is, have you ever worked with a student that identifies as a refugee? So if you have, put yes, number 1. If you haven't, put 2. And if you're not sure, put 3.
Okay, we are getting a fair amount of 1s, a couple of 2s, and a few 3s.
So a bit all over the place. Some of you have, so that's good to hear. So let's get into it. Okay, so defining refugee status. Okay, so a refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin because of a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Okay, so this definition comes to us from UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So typically a refugee is, there's a conflict happening in one country, country A, there's a conflict happening in country A. The citizens of country A leave and they go to country B. While in country B, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, has set up a station there, and the refugees come over. Those that have fled their country come to to country B, and they meet with UNHCR and they apply for refugee status. And UNHCR will determine if they are eligible for refugee status, usually so, depending on the situation. And then they will be resettled to a third country, country C. So to give you an example of what's happening right now in Ukraine, we have individuals that are in the Ukraine, and the war happened there. And then you hear about individuals going to Romania or Poland or a country nearby, and they are registering as refugees, and then they will receive refugee status, and they will be resettled in a third country, the United States or whatever country is going to accept them. So the United States is not the only country that accepts refugees. So they could be resettled to any country that has opened their doors and will accept them. Okay. Another term that we heard a lot during the Afghan evacuation over the summer is an SIV, and that is a special immigrant visa holder. And this program came to be in 2009 as part of the Afghan Allies Protection Act. And SIVs are immigrants that are rather individuals that worked with the United States military in Afghanistan and Iraq, or they worked with an international security assistance forces. So they, when the United States went into Afghanistan and also into Iraq, they created a special program for Iraqis and Afghans who served alongside the United States military. They served as drivers, interpreters, security forces. So they helped with the mission, and part of it, of their helping them with the mission, they were granted SIVs, or special immigrant visas, and they were able to resettle in the United States after their service was up. So this summer, or this past summer, when the Afghan emergency Afghan evacuation was happening, we heard a lot, SIVs, the SIVs. And these were the SIVs. And so far, it's only been used with Iraqis and Afghans. And it'll probably stay that way for a while. The next category is an asylum seeker or an asylee. So an asylum seeker is someone whose request for sanctuary has not yet been processed. So this is an individual, they are in country A, and they leave their country for one reason or another, and they go to country B. And once they arrive in country B, they ask for asylum. The asylum process takes about 2 years to complete, 2 to 5 years, and they have to prove that they are unable, that they cannot go back to their country because of a well-founded fear. So a lot of times we hear certain groups are at the southern border. And so this is something that we've heard a lot recently. We've heard that there are Ukrainians coming in at the southern border. They more than likely left the Ukraine and flew straight to Mexico and they're at the southern border and they want to come into the country because they cannot go back to their country for one reason or another. There isn't necessarily something going on in the country that might be publicized. For example, if an individual identifies as a member of the LGBTQ community and homosexuality is outlawed in their country, they may come to the United States, and that's a well-founded fear that they cannot return to their country because of the laws that will be dangerous to them. So an asylee seeker comes to the United States or comes to the third country. This is also a definition by UNHCR. They come into another country and they ask for asylum, and they ask them for protection because they cannot return to their country. Again, this takes 2 to 5 years. And then final category is humanitarian parolee. So parole allows an individual who may be inadmissible or otherwise ineligible for admission into the United States to be in the United States for a temporary period for urgent humanitarian reason or significant public benefit. Okay, so this term, and I know it is on the state of Maryland's LEF, Learner Enrollment Form. I know this is one of the categories that they check. So next time you guys are registering students and you're filling out your LEFs, look for this category. For the longest, I didn't know what it stood for, but I got to understand it a little bit better. So a parolee or parole is a term that was historically used for Cubans and Haitians entrants. So we called them parolee. And I actually did some research on this term, and it's an old military term that I don't know why it's applied to resettlement, but a parolee is someone who is able to get into a foreign land. That's what the military term is. And we started using this term a lot during the Afghan evacuation. We kept hearing the parolee, parole, the Afghan parolees, and some advocacy groups did not like the term parole, parolee being used. As you can imagine, there was so much stuff going on, and then to hear constantly in the news, Afghan parolees, it didn't sound, it was kind of misleading. So humanitarian was put on in front of it. So it's humanitarian parolee, and that's the way we use it now. And a humanitarian parolee is someone that flees their country. We know that there is something happening in their country, but they don't go through. It's similar to an asylee. I'll say, in the sense that they flee their country and they get here, and then we're trying to process their paperwork in order to give them permanent status, but they come in with temporary status. So if we go back to the definition of SIV, which is an individual that served the United States military in either Afghanistan or Iraq, the individual that served is the only one that receives SIV status when they entered into the country. Their family members were given parolee status, humanitarian parolee status, until their paperwork was processed. So you have a male head of the household who served as an interpreter in the mission in Afghanistan. We evacuated Afghanistan and we took SIVs, and they came, but they also have wives and children and other family members that are going to come with them. So the head of the household, or whoever served in the military as an SIV, they get the status, and then the rest of the family members get the humanitarian parolee status until their paperwork is filed. So I want to stop for a moment and ask if there are any questions, because I know that was a lot of information that I just gave you.
So we have one question. Do humanitarian parolees have work permits when they arrive?
They do not have work permits when they arrive. I will go into the next couple of slides. I will go into who gets work authorization when they arrive. But humanitarian parolees do not get work authorization because they're immediately And we say it's temporary because there is a background check that all refugees have to go through before being granted refugee status.
Okay, and I'm not seeing any other questions.
So now I want to talk a little bit about the refugee resettlement process. It is quite a process, so I'm going to go into that. Okay, so just to do a quick pulse check, how much do you know about the refugee resettlement process? So put an answer in the chat, a lot, I'm somewhat familiar with the process, a little, or nothing. And if you don't know anything, that's fine, because that means I'll just get deeper into it.
Pretty much a mixed bag here, but I'm not seeing any ones, but kind of evenly split between 2, 3, and there are a few 4s.
Perfect. Okay. So during the refugee resettlement process, the first thing that happens is the president, there's a presidential determination that is made, and that is made by the president, and it's agreed upon by Congress, and then that number is released. So there are 23.5 million refugees around the world. On average, the United States takes about 45,000 refugees per year. During the Obama administration, President Obama one time took 70,000 refugees per year. And then the Trump administration reduced that number to 15,000. And then the Biden administration on October 8th, 2021, pledged to admit 125,000 refugees. So that is the presidential determination, is whoever the sitting president is determines how many individuals will be granted refugee status for the year. These refugees will go all over the country, but those resources to allocate, funds are allocated to resettle those refugees throughout the United States. So in addition to admitting to 125,000 refugees, or pledging to admit 125,000 refugees, this is a breakdown of where everyone will come from. So we were expecting about 15,000 from Latin America and the Caribbean, 40,000 from Africa. Europe and Central Asia will have 10,000, East Asia 15,000, Near East and South Asia 35,000, and the unallocated reserve is 10,000. An unallocated reserve is, for example, Europe and Central Asia, there's 10,000 that are going to be admitted entry. And we have a situation like Ukraine right now. And so once 10,000 slots are used, then Ukrainians can then be eligible to receive one of the unallocated reserve slots that are available. So fun fact, anybody want to guess which president let in, allowed the most refugees? Ronald Reagan. I identify as a refugee. My family came to the United States in the 1980s, and it was under Ronald Reagan's administration. So 300,000, Ronald Reagan. Okay, and so this is the process that happens for resettlement. These are the partners. So the first person that, or the first organization that gets involved is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And as I told you earlier, when an individual leaves the conflict, they go to a second country, and there they're met by UNHCR, and they register to become refugees. Once they are determined eligible to receive refugee status because of the situation that's happening, they are referred to a country. In our situation, you're referred to the United States, and the Department of Homeland Security and USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, gets involved. And this is to do the background check, to make sure that everything is what you say. And they also do health screenings. So refugees go through a vigorous vetting process. It can take years to complete. This is where in some cases the refugee camps are set up and people are waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for an interview. And they're waiting for their background checks. Some of the things that they check for is, to make sure that what you said is really true. Another thing that happens is, they want to make sure that you weren't a part of the problem in the previous country. We've seen that happen in some cases where someone with the Nazis, right? So individuals who were Nazis during World War II, they went to another country, they registered as refugees, but then come to find out later on that they had this sketchy background and they were able to get through the system. So the Department of Homeland Security and USCIS does a pretty rigorous background check on individuals. And at that point, the individual can stay in the country. It takes about 2 years, or it could take 25 years. There's really no way to determine how long one individual will have to go through in order to get their security vetting complete. So it just depends. The next organization that gets involved, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'll let you finish your slide. We have 2 questions.
Okay. So the next organization that gets involved is the International Organization for Migration, which is called IOM. And IOM is the organization that arranges the flights for individuals to go into the country that they are going to be resettled in. So once they've been determined for refugee status, they are recommended to their country. In the country, in our case, it's USCIS and Department of Homeland Security. They go through a security check. Once that's been approved, and then they go to IOM, the International Organization for Migration, and that's when their flight information is set up, and they fly over to the United States. Now, contrary to popular belief, and this is something that I always wanted people to know, the tickets provided by IOM to refugees to arrive and to go to their new countries are on a loan. They have to pay it back. So I know it's a misconception that if you're a refugee, the government takes care of everything for you and you'll be set and you'll go to the new country and your life will be perfect. You're safe. You're safe, but you are being resettled with debt because you will pay back the tickets that you were given to fly over here. So refugees do start their life in the United States in debt because they have to pay back their airline tickets. So if you have a family of 6 people, you're paying back the airline tickets for 6 people. And this is their first taste of debt in the United States. The next program, the next partner that gets involved is the Department of State, the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. So this is PRM. And PRM is the organization that decides which state you're going to go to, and it matches you with the resettlement agency that will help you with the resettlement process. And then the final organization is the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Child and Family Office of Refugee Resettlement. And then this does the immediate wraparound services. So this is the organization that will put you in work programs, help you get health insurance and all those things. The wraparound services are administered by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And that is a process. And this process, from when the conflict starts in your country until you are resettled, could take 2 years, it could take 10 years. It just depends on the situation. So I'll stop for a moment because that was a lot of information, and I'll take questions.
Okay, so there are two questions.
Mhm.
One is, people who just want to move to the US for better opportunities are in a different category and in a different quota, correct?
Yes, so people who just want to move for different opportunities. I know you're probably thinking about maybe Central Americans. Those individuals might be called economic migrants. Somebody who is living in a country and there's no conflict and they just want to leave, they might be called an immigrant when they arrive here. A refugee is a special category of individuals who are fleeing persecution. Did I answer your question?
Okay, another question is, does the President Biden announcement to allow 100,000 Ukrainians to enter count against the preset determination?
No, it doesn't. So with Afghans and Ukrainians, because they were both emergency situations, those were different programs were created. So with the Afghan, for example, I think there's 75,000 Afghans that have been admitted into the country since the evacuation, and they are part of a program called the Afghan Protection Act. And then Ukraine is going to be kind of similar. It's going to be similar to the situation that was done in Afghanistan.
Okay, we've got two more questions. And if you do have a question, we're going to ask that you put it in the chat as opposed to raising your hand. So thank you. Another question is payment of the airline tickets of Afghan humanitarian parolees always a loan?
Yes, it's that flight is arranged by the International Organization for Migration.
Okay, and the other one, when you asked, did you answer her question? She's saying that yes, you answered her question.
Awesome.
And that is all the questions for right now.
Okay. So, upon arrival, refugees receive. So they will receive, once refugee status and everything has been cleared, they will receive permanent resident status. So this means that they're permanent residents. They have a lot of rights. Obviously, they can't vote or they can't hold public office, but they are permanent residents. They can rent apartments. They can apply for jobs. They can get driver's license. They can enroll their children into school. They can enroll themselves into school. If you have ever known an immigrant or something, and they say something like, oh, my visa is going to expire, I have to go to another country for 6 months or 6 weeks, I have to leave the country every 6 months. That's not the situation with refugees because they are given permanent resident status. They are given work authorization documents, which is the green card. And this is a picture of the green card. It used to be green in the 80s, but it's not anymore. But the permanent resident card is the work authorization card. And they do not have they don't have a birth certificate that can be used. So their main form of identification is the permanent resident card. And then they have a social security number, so they are eligible to work. They're eligible to open up a bank account. And then they are eligible to become an American citizen after 5 years of permanent residency status. And all of these documents, the permanent resident status happens immediately once they are granted refugee status. The work authorization and the social security number will come within the first year, depending on how clogged the system is, it could take 90 days, it could take a year, but they will have work authorization and the social security number. An asylee has to prove their case. As I said, it takes 2 to 5 years to prove asylum. And then once they are given and the clock starts ticking for them to become, then the clock starts ticking and they'll get their documents. Once asylum has been granted, their documents will start to come in. The humanitarian parolees that we talked about, normally, under normal circumstances, it would have been done in the Afghan parolees and the Ukrainian parolees. That process would have been done before they arrived, but because of the nature of the situation, they came here, they were given this temporary parolee status, and then they will go through the vetting while here, and then they will get granted with the documents necessary. Any questions? Because we're gonna start to switch gears now and talk more about adult ed.
There are no questions at this time.
Perfect. So once refugees have arrived and they have within 90 days, things get going. So they are resettled, they are put into housing, they receive medical screening once they are here, and then they have to work because you got to work to live in America. So there are several barriers to employment. I know growing up, some myths or stories that I heard about refugees are they don't have to pay taxes for 7 years. That was the longest one. I'm like, we don't have to pay taxes for 7 years. You're right. I wish. Or they're given everything. They're given a place to live. They're given cars. They're given stuff. They are helped, but they still have to work. And so, as I said earlier, the IOM flight and money has to be paid back. So they need to get to work. And they may be given cash assistance, but cash assistance doesn't last long at all. It's not enough to become rich, or it's not enough to not work. They are eligible to receive like subsidies, public subsidies, like food stamps and that sort of thing, but it's not really encouraged. I mean, they're encouraged to work, and so they do work with a refugee with a employment specialist to help find employment. But as you can imagine, there are barriers to employment that they face, and these are some of them.
There
I have a
is
question.
one other question.
Mhm.
Parolees are not guaranteed permanent status without being given authorization to do so, correct?
Let me read the question again. I'm not guaranteed permanent status without being given authorization. Yeah, they're not guaranteed permanent status. They have to go through the security vetting. And they could be denied and be sent back. But once they have completed the vetting process and they've done their health screening, they may be eligible. Did I answer your question? Okay, so some of the barriers to employment that refugees face. Limited English proficiency. So if you're in your country and everything seems fine, and all of a sudden you're being uprooted and you have to leave because there's a war going on. You know, I know we say English is the international language and everywhere you go, somebody speaks English, but it may not be the case. If you come from a country that was kind of closed off or something, and English, just American culture did not necessarily make it over there, or Western culture did not make it over there, you may have limited English proficiency. You didn't have time to prepare. They might have difficulty transferring cultural knowledge and experience of the workforce system of their native country to the American workforce system. So in my country, for example, you know, a lot of times they took off between 12 p.m. and 2, everything is closed in the country because that's when everybody eats lunch, and you go home and you eat lunch. And then you work longer days as a result. So again, if you were not prepared to move to a new country and you did not study the country and the culture, this may come as a shock, and individuals have difficulty transferring that cultural knowledge. Limited digital literacy. You have some situations where, like in the Congo, for example, that conflict has been happening since 2003. There are some individuals who have been living in a refugee camp in a neighboring country, and they just don't have access to digital literacy. We know now, especially post-pandemic, everything is digital. And you have somebody and you say, oh, you want to work at Walmart, apply online. Okay, let's do that. Let's apply online. Another one is limited access to childcare, transportation, and or healthcare. A lot of situations, people were living in communities where they had extended family, and there was somebody there to help them with their children or transportation, or there was somebody who was a local doctor. When they come here, they don't have those resources anymore. And then their entry status may affect their ability to work. So again, we talked about asylees and humanitarian parolees who are not granted work authorization as soon as they arrive. And so maybe they will be granted, maybe they won't, but upon entry, they're not necessarily able to work or eligible to work. And then they're likely dealing with trauma. War and famine, whatever's going on, like the atrocities of war, they're dealing with trauma. And I mean, everything that they knew was turned upside down. And, a lot of times they left with the clothes on their back, and then they're resettled in another country. They don't know what happened to their friends and their neighbors. So there's a lot of PTSD that comes along with that. Okay, and then we have another category, which is the internationally trained professionals, or the ITPs. Now, these individuals are individuals that were professional in their countries. So they were the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, the professors and teachers, nurses, individuals that were highly regarded possibly in their countries. And I mean, everybody that's on this call today, I know you're a professional. Imagine going to a country where you don't speak the language, you don't understand the culture, and trying to, you're in your 40s or, whatever, you're an adult, you can't start over. And you are told that you have to start over. Where do you begin? Where do you even begin? And so a nurse is a nurse. It doesn't matter if you're a nurse in Nigeria or in Cambodia or in Ontario or Detroit, Michigan. A nurse is a nurse. The work doesn't stay the same. You may not necessarily know the language necessary to perform the task. So they have significant barriers around English proficiency. And it's not, the basic conversational English that that you would expect them to know. It's the industry specific that they don't necessarily know. So if someone was in logistics or they were a truck driver in their country, they could drive a truck. Truck driving is easy. It's not easy, but the task doesn't change. But when they work for an organization in the United States and their supervisor says, make sure you jot down your mileage every week. If you don't know what that means, you're going to be in a bad situation. Like, jot down your mileage for a week, and you're translating it literally in your head, and it's not making sense. So that's a barrier for them. Another one is often find themselves without personal and professional networks. So I know we are a society that really encourages membership to professional networks. So we have LinkedIn, we're members of TESOL, we are part of the nurses union, and in your work, you meet other individuals who are in the same field as you, who can help you get your next position or go to another company. When they come as adults and they're starting all over, they don't have that cushion of a network. Sometimes personal or professional, because they don't always know where they're going to be resettled. Another one is translating their foreign earned credentials. We say, oh, if they have an advanced degree in their country, it'll be easy for them to just pick right back up where they left off. That's not necessarily the case, because what was considered a master's degree in one country may only be viewed as a bachelor's degree in this country. We see that a lot in the medical professions. So their foreign earned credentials aren't always translated correctly. And then because they have to start work immediately, because they have to start living, they get rapid attachment jobs or low skill, low wage roles. And so they get what they could get because bills don't stop. And, you go to your local 7-Eleven every morning and you get to know the guy at the gas station, and you find out that he was the chief of staff of radiology at a hospital in Burma, and you're like, you were the chief of staff, why are you working at 7-Eleven? Because he has to survive, he has bills to pay, and they don't necessarily have the luxury to start the process all over again because bills need to be paid. And so we call these rapid attachment jobs. It's a lot of times it's the first job that they get. They're able to bring money into their household and they stick with it. And I know teachers, you guys have seen it. I taught for a long time, and I've had students and they tell me, they were a PhD, or they tell me they were dean of students at a university in their country. And I'm like, oh, what do you do now? I'm like, oh, I'm a nanny. I'm like, what do you, how did you go from being a dean of students to a nanny? It's still in the same strata, I guess, but they have to survive. They have to do what they have to do.
So we have a question.
Sure.
Once here, how long can work authorization take for asylees and parolees, more or less, if known?
I can't give an answer to that because it all depends. For an asylee, they do have to prove asylum. They do have to prove their case, and that could take 2 to 5 years. Once asylum has been granted, they can begin the process for work authorization. For the humanitarian parolees, it's kind of the same situation. They have to go through do their background check, their fingerprinting, their health check, and then once refugee status has been granted, then the paperwork will start. Right now with the Afghan evacuations, one thing to keep in mind is during the previous administration, the presidential determination was down to 15,000, and now we're at 125,000. And so, as you can imagine, there were resettlement agencies and organizations that were closed all over the country during the previous administration. So right now we're in the process of rebuilding the refugee resettlement program, hiring new people to do this work because, the Afghan evacuation happened, earthquake in Haiti happened, and then Ukrainian evacuation, or the situation in Ukraine happened. So, every process within refugee resettlement requires someone to do the work, and the program is still being rebuilt.
Okay, we have one more question. What is offered to help in translating their foreign learned skills to better opportunities in the U.S.? And who are those agencies that assist with that?
So one of the organizations that I know and I have worked with is WES, and it's World Education Services. They often do presentations in the DMV. So if you get a chance, look at their website. It's west.org. It's World Education Services. They are an organization that works with skilled immigrants or internationally trained immigrants. And then the state of Maryland, and particularly the Department of Labor, has an organization called the Skilled Immigrant Task Force, which I am proud to be a member of. And the Skilled Immigrant Task Force, and I think Joanna's on the call with us today. Joanna's actually the leader of the Skilled Immigrant Task Force at the department, in the Labor Department. And we meet once a month to kind of address these barriers and figure out ways to work with them. So Joanna, if you could put your email in the chat, if you have questions about internationally trained professionals, Joanna is a great person to talk to about it, to find out more about what the state of Maryland is doing.
Yes, she's here and she put her email in the chat. And one more question. If they are unable to work while here, are they just relying on public benefits?
No, they're not eligible for public benefits. They're maybe a relative, maybe a church, maybe a small nonprofit, but they are not eligible to receive public benefits if they are unauthorized to be here.
Okay, that is all the questions for right now.
Perfect. How are we doing on time? Uh-oh. Okay, let me move quicker. So some of the traumatic stresses that refugees face include war and persecution, displacement from their home, flight and migration, poverty, family and community violence. And I think I've spoken about these throughout the presentation, so you can understand the traumatic stresses that might affect refugees upon arrival. Okay, so to the meat of the presentation, applying adult learning principles. Okay, so this is a chart about an adult learner. So we know that adult learners need problem-centered learning. We know that they're most motivated by subjects relevant to them in employment and in life. They bring experiences, so they're basis for learning and including mistakes, and they need to be involved in planning instruction and planning and evaluation. So this is the profile of an adult learner that I think all of us who have worked in adult ed know. And these are some adult learning principles. So adults want lessons that are problem solving oriented. We have to keep in mind that adults have experience. They're adults, they've lived their entire lives in another country. So some of the stuff that we're talking about in classes is not new to them. They've lived. They're internally motivated. So, you know, you got to pay the bills. You got to provide health insurance for your family. They have to live, so they're internally motivated. So it's not going to be one of those leisurely things where they're just coming to hang out. They're ready to learn because they need to learn. They need to learn how to survive in this country, and they are self-directed. Okay, and so our old friend, the CASAS competencies. When I worked in adult ed in the state of Maryland, I worked as an instructor, and I was the intake and assessment manager in my last position. So the CASAS competencies were my good friend, and whenever I gave post-tests, I said, well, did you use your CASAS competencies? Are you looking at your CASAS competencies? And I created CASAS competencies for all my teachers for many, many years. So I always promote the competencies. So the competencies are more than 360 essential life skills that youth and adult need to be functionally competent members of their community, their family, and their workforce. They're relevant across a full range of instructional levels from beginning literacy through high school completion, including transition to post-secondary education and training. And they provide instructional objectives, direct links to test content for monitoring, learning, criteria for program evaluation, and a reference system for instructional materials. So CASAS competencies are really, really important. If you are an administrator on this call, you will probably appreciate me for saying that, because CASAS competencies are directly related to the CASAS test, which is used for monitoring and evaluation. In the state of Maryland, you might also use the TABE, but it's directly linked to testing, and that is really directly linked to funding. So yay, CASAS competencies. So now I'm going to, so these were the adult learning principles. This is a definition of CASAS competencies, and this is an example of how you can use adult learning principles to create lesson plans based on CASAS competencies. So adults are internally motivated. So CASAS competency 1.4 is that an individual understands methods of procedures to obtain housing and related services. Now, we talked about this, that adult learners and refugees, all adult learners are internally motivated to learn. So 1.4, these are some of the competencies that go along with it. So they're able to identify different kinds of housing or areas of the home and common household items. Select appropriate housing by reading ads, signs, and other information and making inquiries, interpreting lease and rental documents, and interpreting information to obtain, maintain, and cancel housing utilities. So this is an example of how, this is an example of an adult learning principle and the CASAS competencies you all have. And depending on your textbook that you are using, it will show you which CASAS competency aligns with the lesson that you're teaching. Adults are ready to learn. They're ready to learn, they have to learn. 0.2, communicate regarding personal information. If you are following your book and CASAS competencies, and you know this question will be on the CASAS test at the end of the semester or the beginning of the semester, you should be working with your student to respond appropriately to common personal information questions, complete personal information forms, and converse about daily and leisure activities and personal interests. Now, this is not only for the test, but they will use this in real life. Adults are self-directed. So competency 1.3, they understand methods and procedures used to purchase goods and services. Again, this is something that they have to do to live in the United States, to live and function in society. It might be things that we take for granted because we've been doing it since we were teenagers or whatever, but individuals that are new to the country don't necessarily know the way things work. Some countries don't have a credit system. And so, make sure that you're working with your students to teach them. Imagine going to another country when you're 40 years old or 50 years old, and you have to learn the way this country works very, very quickly in order to survive. And then they are problem oriented. So they need to be able to communicate effectively in the workplace. Again, they may come from a culture where, giving feedback to your supervisor or saying that you don't understand something is viewed as a weakness, so they won't do it. They may be afraid to work overtime. They may want to take some time off because it's a religious holiday in their country. And they need to be able to communicate. And these are the things that we work on in our classrooms. They have experiences. So understanding basic health and medical information. They've been to a doctor before. They know what hurts. They have experiences. They just need the necessary language to do it on their own. So you're not teaching them new information. You're teaching them to use what they have and apply it in a situation to live in this country. I'll go back to this slide, but here are some resources that these slides will become available to you after the presentation. But here are 3 resources that I would like to share with you all. The Refugee Educator Academy is really great. And if you have some time to read, I know the fiscal year is coming to an end in a couple of weeks, and it'll be some time before the next session begins. If you have time, please take a look at some of these resources. And with that, 5 minutes for questions.
So as participants might be typing in questions, I want to let you know that I put in a session feedback survey in the chat as well as a proof of participation. You want to fill out your proof of participation only once, and you'll do that for all your sessions. We will try and get those out as quickly as we can, but please allow at a minimum 2 weeks after the end of this virtual training institute, which will not end until the end of Thursday. So if you could go ahead and fill this out. We do have a question. I think I heard you say something about a test. What test were you referring to?
The CASAS. So I know in the programs that I worked for at Prince George's Community College and in Montgomery County, the tests we used, the CASAS exam, and the CASAS, these competencies are aligned with test questions.
So somebody responded, thank you tremendously. This was a great and most informative. I would agree. This is incredibly timely and relevant, especially right now in our political climate. So Rishan, can't even begin to thank you enough for this just valuable information for our programs that will definitely help out those who need it most.
I just want to add that a lot of resettlement agencies do the wraparound work, meaning they work with clients maybe 90 days to 6 months. But students eventually find us. They find the teachers. And I am one of you. I'm a teacher. Okay. I'm a teacher first. They find us, and we are the ones that work with them. We are the ones that help them find sustainability. We talk to them. We help them write resumes. We help them fill out job applications. We are the ones, and unfortunately, we're not really a part of the conversation when it comes to refugee resettlement. And so it's really the teachers, and we become their first friends, and they run stuff by us, and they say, my daughter said she's going to this dance. You know, I don't know what to do. Girls don't go to dances in our country. And they're talking about prom, and we're explaining it to them like, oh, it's okay, you know. So we are very, very, very vital. We are their first friends. We are their first confidants. And we are so important. And I hope that we will become more, we'll be part of the conversation more, because we have a lot to say. We have a lot of experiences, and you guys have been doing it so for a long time. So, you know, just thank you for what you're doing, and keep doing it, because teachers are the unsung heroes.
So I don't see any other questions, but I do see a lot of thank yous and expressing how informative this was to the participants. So again, on behalf of the Maryland Department of Labor, I want to thank you so much for this valuable information and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.